Hi everyone, and welcome to week 10 of INF210 collections. So this week we are stepping slightly outside the collection management life cycle. As you can see here, this is the week for vendors and publishers. So what we've done so far, just to recap, we have worked out that we need to know who our users and our stakeholders are and what their needs are in terms of what the collections that we are building can do to support them. So who are our people? What do they want our collections to have in them? That's the first step we need. Once we've got an understanding of who our people are and what they need, then we can go through the selection section or the selection step in the cycle, which is all about choosing what we'd like to buy to be able to meet the needs of those users. Once we've got our shopping list, we can move to the acquisition stage, which is where we're actually going out and doing the shopping, whether that be literally walking into a shop and buying something in some cases, or it could be contracting the services of a vendor or a publisher, and that is this step here. So they're not really a step in the life cycle themselves, but they are a facilitator of this particular step, the acquisition step, and they're also a facilitator of the evaluation step. So this week what we're looking at is vendors and publishers, but particularly in relation to the acquisition stage. In the collection evaluation module for next week, we'll be looking at how the vendors and publishers feed into that step as well. But for now, we're just going to look really at how vendors and publishers work with the acquisition stage. So let's just go and have a quick look at what we've got to work with this week. I'm just going to jump into the right bit. Vendors and publishers, module 7. Okay, so Chapter 5 of the textbook is a really good one to read on this, and then really it's just a matter of working through or reading through and having a look at some of the links as usual. So this in particular is a good one to look at. Caval, they are a company, they're a company that are in Victoria, and they are out in Bundoora, if you know Victoria at all, and I actually went there last week on our Melbourne study visit, and it was really, really interesting to see the work that they're doing as a vendor or as a supplying company. So one of the things that they're really good at is non-English language materials. So libraries will come to them and say, we want to build up our, Mandarin language collection. Could you please go out and buy a whole ton of stuff for us? And they'll tell them the sort of subject areas they want covered. And then Caval, in this case, will go out to their suppliers and they'll get in truckloads of Mandarin books. They'll bring them into their buildings in Bundoora and they'll catalogue them. They'll put spine labels on them. They'll add entries for those individual books into the library catalogue of the library that's requested them, that's asked to buy them. And they'll stamp them with that library's stamp, and they'll cover them in plastic or whatever it is that that library wants them to do to get it ready to go on the shelf. And then it gets boxed up and sent up to the library that's asked for them. So that's a fantastic service that is provided by Caval as a vendor. So that whole sort of idea of producing things as shelf ready is the term we use. So that's using that vendor as a facilitator for that selection, for the acquisition stage within the life cycle. So have a little read through here, and there's also information there about what publishers can do for us. Some really interesting things about this is a print-on-demand machine, which is a really interesting sort of change, I suppose, in publishing in the last few years, where publishers had always been very reluctant to publish a book that didn't have the potential for huge sales, because it costs a lot of money to make a book. So publishers would traditionally say, we won't publish this particular book because we don't believe it's going to sell enough. So then libraries would often say to them, but we've got people who really want this book, or it's out of print and we want another copy. Could you publish a couple for us? And in the past they'd always say, no, it's too expensive. But then someone invented these really cool things called espresso machines, and these will actually print one-off titles, and some libraries have them now where you can go along as a library user and print off an individual book for yourself, and these machines print them and bind them and spit them out at the other end, and you get yourself a nice book. So that's just one way of acquiring one-off, slow, really low print run books. There used to be one in a library that I worked in at the University of Melbourne, but it kept breaking, so I think they got rid of it in the end. But some libraries have still got them, and the technology is improving all the time. So it's just a really interesting way of publishers being able to work as suppliers for really low print run books. So that's something worth having a look at. Unpublished materials, things like theses and that sort of thing too, that's worth having a look at. Now, this patron driven acquisition, this is a really interesting practice where instead of the library staff being the people who are doing the selecting and acquiring, the patrons are doing the selecting and acquiring. So they, the good side of this, so what happens, right, is like you can have a vendor or a publisher might make 1,000 titles available to be purchased, and they might put all of those 1,000 titles into the library's catalogue. But the library doesn't actually own these things yet. So what happens is the user comes along, they do some searches on the catalogue, they see a book, and they think, oh, I'd love to see that. I'll click on that and I'll get hold of that book because it's here on the catalogue. But what's actually happening is that clicking on the title of that book by the patron will then trigger off either a purchase of that book from the publisher, or it might trigger off a single access into it if it's an ebook. And then libraries can make these arrangements with the vendors and publishers that say, okay, after say 5 of these clicks, 5 different users have clicked on this thing, that will then trigger a purchase, and then we'll actually buy this thing from you. Or they might make the arrangement that 10 people have to click on it before a purchase is initiated. Or it might be that as soon as one person clicks on it, then they will provide access to the content in terms of a lease rather than a purchase. So they can buy a one-off access to it rather than actually buying a copy of the file itself. So there's all these different ways of patron-driven acquisition working. And there's a really nice article here. This one here, the first one there, I had a look at that this morning, and it's a really good one because it's really short, but also it explains some of the ways that patron-driven access can work, which is it's worth having a look at. And this is a nice one too. It's a lot longer, but if you just read the introduction and even the literature review, if you want to get through that far, because that talks about the positives and negatives and some of the different models we can use. So that's something that's a big deal in libraries at the moment, and will continue to be so, I think. And it's something that we're still sort of tweaking and trying to get right, because you can imagine if you've got one patron who clicks on everything and then starts buying stuff from doing that, well, then you can run your budget down very, very quickly. So a lot of libraries now are putting in another layer in between the patron and the vendor and saying, so they might get a report at the end of each day of all the different books that have been clicked on in the library, that in their catalogue, and then they can make a choice whether to allow that to trigger a sale or a purchase or not. So there's lots of different ways I can do it, and it's an interesting one to have a read about. So that's really it for today, or for this week. And so I think probably the most interesting thing is to look at what some of these ones here. So look at what those services are and get an idea about what vendors and publishers can do in terms of the acquisition process. And then next week we'll look at what vendors and publishers can do with the collection evaluation, and also other ways of evaluating our collections that are independent of the vendors and publishers as well. And at the moment we're working through your assessment that's being marked at the moment, so hopefully you're not sweating too much on those. So far so good, they're good. So we'll get them back to you as soon as we can. And I think that'll do for the week. So I hope you enjoy reading through this little sidestep out of the collection management life cycle. And next module, next week, we'll be back in with the collection evaluation phase. See you then. Bye.